Action. So for this week's episode, we're going to be discussing about the recently inaugurated GERD Dam, Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. And GERD is Africa's largest hydropower project that's been completed to date. And we're going to be unpacking about the GERD, the regional geopolitics, the economic and social implications with my co-hosts Abdul Baghi and Erisa. And I think to give you a little bit of context about the GERD, it's again the largest hydro power generating dam. It generates close to 5,450 megawatts, which is colossal. And additionally, it is a very sensitive topic in terms of geopolitics, since, as we know it, the Nile crosses multiple countries, including Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, and all the other countries in between. So I think I'll start with Abdul Baghi, and I will ask you, what does a huge project like this mean for Africa in terms of signaling Africa's ability to complete large-scale projects?
Okay, and welcome our listeners. I think this project started somewhere 2011, and maybe that time most people would cast doubts about whether it's going to be successful or not, because most of the times most projects that start big like this, it get to some point and will have funding hurdles which will cause it to stagnate somewhere along the line. But this project has been exceptional, and we are happy. And one thing I realized just recently is that this project was funded by local investments in Ethiopia. I don't know if that's right. Brooke, is that right?
Yeah, you're right.
That's a huge win. Being able to build a 5 billion dam without external finance is what we hope for. Now it means that Ethiopia get to use the dam anyhow they like without any external influence. It's not like you build a 5 billion dam and then in 5 years you are struggling how to pay debt. You are struggling how to repay the financier of the debt. When we go outside of our own countries and sort of finance to finance big projects like this, we have to pay higher interest rates. They call it risks because they kind of think that our countries are risky, and so they charge us higher. And because they charge higher, it means the amount we'll have to repay back is also higher. So we end up having huge debt. But one important thing about this project is that it's huge, as you can see, and we are able to finance it within Ethiopia's own coffers. So it's a win for the continent, it's a win for Ethiopia.
Okay, thank you, Abdul Baghi. And to you, Erisa, I think one of the interesting aspects of this dam is its geopolitical dimension. And as we know it, Egypt, a country synonymous with Nile, has raised a number of objections to the construction of the dam. And interestingly, Egypt argues that anything that's been constructed on the Nile might and will affect its water usage rights and its food security. And it has even gone to the extent of raising colonial time eras in which Great Britain divided the Nile usage between Sudan and Egypt. How do you analyze the construction of the dam vis-a-vis Egyptian objections, Erisa?
Thank you, Brooke. I mean that you raise a very important point there. I mean, I first build on to what Abdullah said. It's a very huge investment which has been domestically financed from an African perspective, Pan Africanist point of view. Is a good move. especially from Ethiopia, being able to raise the domestic finance, moving away from the previous traditional trend that we are used to of having the Western and European countries come finance huge development projects, and at the end of the day, we all know what happens with them. But the shift to domestic financing is a great move. For that, we need to applaud Ethiopia. So going back to the point of Egypt, I mean, you clearly brought up the point. Egypt has a long-term tie to the Nile. You cited the colonial era. We all know what happened. I think there were some agreements which Egypt made with the British in 1929, and I think the next one was 1959. So those colonial agreements that gave Egypt kind of an upper hand on the Nile waters, and now if we see the come of this GERD project, which is largely in the hands of Ethiopia, so there is a collusion there. It's a kind of a challenge to the traditional original Egypt dominance within the Nile waters, as well we have been saying. So largely from that perspective, we can say Egypt is very scared of what might come next, considering the fact that 95% of Egyptian population, they depend on the Nile waters. And so viewing this project, which is highly or almost 100% in the hands of Ethiopia, it is something that points to the change in the geopolitical perspective and how the balance of power now, the powers are going into the hands of Ethiopia, because they are going to harness the Nile waters. And so on the side of Egypt, it is kind of a fear. What happens next? What happens to us? Because now if we can't control the waters, then we are losing our long-term dominance that we had on the waters. I mean, some people have even went away to write about the water war and the water conflicts. And I mean, we have been seeing all this skepticism coming from all of these countries which are along the Nile, straight away from the source of it, from Uganda, then through South Sudan, Egypt, and Ethiopia. So, I mean, it is something that we have to closely monitor and see what would be Egypt's response. But of course, it is something that relates closely to their national security, and they view it as really as something that is going to be challenging, considering that historical attachment that they have had with the Nile, and considering the fact that almost the whole population of the country depends on the Nile waters. So their life is on the Nile, and for them, anything that happens along the Nile is something that they take serious, because it affects all of the dynamics of the population. I'll leave it at that point and then give it back to you, Brooke.
Okay, thank you, Arisa. And now I'm going to Abdul Bari, and I'm going to ask you an economic question. And that is, the dam is expected to benefit more than 50 million people. So existing projections are putting it that the light will power more than 65 million people, but let's hold a more conservative estimate of 50 million people. How do you see this translating into industrial growth, regional opportunities, and social environmental trade-offs, as we know it? How do you see this new power generation capacity translating into development?
Okay, I think we know electricity and power as usual is the backbone of every industrialization or every economy. So to start from the environmental part, this is a hydroelectric power and power generating project. So there's no way it doesn't have any environmental impact, because it's one of the cleanest energy we know. It's renewable, the water flows and it generates electricity. So in terms of environment, we can say that the emission this is the best possible one you can get. Now, when we move on to what economic impacts can it give to the country? Let me cite an example in Ghana. In 2015, when we ran into what we call doomsor, it's just like the frequently lights goes off and come, so it tends to disrupt businesses. For example, people who set up cold stores to sell meat, you have electricity going off and coming back on intermittently. It disturbs your business, so you have meats getting rotten. You have industries that cannot operate because the electricity goes on and come. It tends to burn your motors and other stuff. So at that time, they projected that production and some businesses, production really gone down, and businesses were intending to leave the country just because electricity wasn't reliable. So if you translate this into the case of Ethiopia, you realize that ordinarily, when we were living, we didn't know this is how important electricity was until we started facing those problems. So now you can put it in the Ethiopian perspective. You realize that now that you're having a dam, which translates to the fact that you're going to have the cost of electricity is going to be down, and it means that if the cost of electricity is down, businesses are going to flood in. What now our main problem should just be is that, okay, is it that maybe they are going to lure businesses in and increase taxes? Or so now the fear of most businesses will only be on taxes and not on energy. Meanwhile, in other countries, they fear of both. So it means that Ethiopia, or this case, have upper hand in attracting businesses into Ethiopia. So, and I learned that a lot of people in Ethiopia, forgetting the percentages, are not connected to the national grid. So, I mean, now that the generation is less costly, it means the money can be transferred into transmission, which will mean that electricity ration every part of the country. And one important thing about electricity is that it means that your schools will be able to operate the modern IT systems. If you don't have electricity in a certain community or what, it means that they don't have access to computers. And you can imagine a school in the current days without access to internet and all those kind of things. So the importance are immense. We can't even count. So I think from the economic perspective, this is going to benefit Ethiopia immensely and very much. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Abdul Bari. And now I'm going to go to you, Erisa, and I'm going to discuss about the recent developments in Ethiopia. And one thing that we have seen recently is we've seen a lot of Bitcoin miners coming to Ethiopia. And the government is arguing that even though there is a lot of power being generated in Ethiopia, setting up the transmission lines is quite expensive. So the government is following a strategy where you let in Chinese, Russian Bitcoin miners to set up Bitcoin mining facilities around dams and power generating stations, and they can monetize the stranded power, the power which cannot be connected to the people, to the industries that are in need. And how do you analyze this? Do you see a risk of illicit practices? Maybe perhaps the power isn't going to where it's supposed to go if it's being sold to the Bitcoin mining. It seems highly unlikely that the government has the balances and checks in place to appropriately channel the funds that it gains from Bitcoin mining and reinvest it into actual power distribution lines. So how do you see this new ascent, specifically that Ethiopia has become the #1 Bitcoin miner in Africa and is also included in the top 10 Bitcoin mining countries around the world?
Yeah, I mean, that is very interesting, and I think it is something that is really coming out. As you mentioned, there are a lot of things to weigh in onto that. One, we can say, at a face value that it is something good for the country because it is now highly ranked, and maybe for those who are involved. But again, we have to analyze critically those who are involved in the Bitcoin mining, as you have mentioned it, like Chinese, Russians, and maybe a little bit of a few local people from Ethiopia. But I mean, what we need to understand also, what is the capacity of the local people to engage in this Bitcoin mining, you know? And at the end of the day, if you look at the general incentive for the government, is always looking at the investment and who has the money to invest, who has the capacity to invest. At the end of the day, trying to, you know, fight poverty, fight unemployment, and things like that to stabilize the economy through the Bitcoin adoption and all of the infrastructure that are being developed. But the question has to come back to us: who is doing this and why are they doing it? As you have clearly mentioned about some Russian mining companies and I think Chinese companies. This is something that we need to worry about as well from a Pan-Africanist point of view, because at the end of the day, we know what happens. These are foreign companies which are just after profit. And I mean, looking at the whole scenario of the dam, Abdul was talking about the economic value and the benefits coming out from the dam. But if I was the one analyzing that point of view, I wouldn't be quick to make a conclusion that this is really going to be very, very beneficial for Ethiopia. Well, at the forefront you can say that, but I mean, maybe if we look at other particular different cases in other different countries, we need to ask ourselves, we have a lot of dams across Africa, but ideally I will just stick to a few examples within my country. We have a lot of dams from different sources. Some are even in Ginger where the Nile comes from, but at the end of the day, this electricity, however much it is needed and important, doesn't reach the communities. You still have communities which have no electricity at all, despite the fact that you are producing a lot of electricity. And because of the economic system that the society is pursuing, we end up even exporting. And I think this is also something that we are going to see in Ethiopia. I think they are trying now to become one of the main exporters of power out of this dam. So at the end of the day, it goes to who has money to purchase what, and who has money to invest where, and why are they investing there. And in this case, no wonder we are seeing Russian and Chinese companies taking over the Bitcoining industry, around this dam. So, I mean, this is something that we don't have control over. First of all, it is the government. The government needs investments, so it has to give investment opportunity from people who have the money to invest. But again, yeah, as we said, it will help to solve a little bit of a few problems in the country, but not to a large extent. But also, we need to, as I said, we need to be cautious about who controls these Bitcoining companies. Are there Ethiopian, homegrown companies which are also engaging in this investment, or it is going to be entirely left in the hands of the Russians and Chinese? So, how how much how much in terms of investment is the Ethiopian government going to invest? So to make sure that there is a balance of sovereignty within this Bitcoin industry. If you leave it entirely in the hands of these foreign companies, they are going to invest, yes, and it will boom maybe, but who will be having these benefits? At the end of the day, if it is not the local people, then it will not be helpful. So, but again, that is one aspect, but there are other aspects. Is it going to result into economic empowerment to the people? Is it going to, maybe bring in new technologies? And these technologies, are they locally bred within Ethiopia, or at least from Africa, or they are from outside Africa? Because now, as we are crying that the West is taking over Africa, now we have the problem of the Chinese, we have the problem of Russia. as our new developmental allies. So you can't say now we don't want Western aid, we don't want Western encroachment, and again falling up, ending up in the hands of the Chinese and the Russian. So all of these are issues which we need to look at very critically right away from the start, and we make sure that there is a clear line that is drawn to ensure that we need these sectors to grow, we need the industry to grow, but it has to grow wholesomely, ensuring that there is proper control, there is proper involvement, and all of the benefits are trickling down to especially the local community, not just in the hands of the few people who are holding these companies and all the investment, be it within the Bitcoin, be it within the general uh, power sector. But as I said, we need to be careful about the risks that come along such investments. So I'll stop there at the moment and then give it back to you, Brooke.
Okay, thank you, Risa.
Mm.
Interestingly, I think Egypt and Sudan have been raising objections. I think both of them have been calling for a binding agreement between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. And now, my second question would be that, as we know it, the Nile not only passes through 3 countries, but it also passes through Uganda, South Sudan, and other countries as well, more than 6 or 7 countries. And Sudan and Egypt, as it stands, are only interested in getting into a binding agreement with Ethiopia. How do you guys see the fact that there needs to be a comprehensive water usage agreement, not only between uh, Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, but also with all the basin countries? Do you think there can be a win-win solution in the future where all Nile basin countries, including Uganda, South Sudan, can benefit from this?
Okay, I think that usually the problem is the downstream countries like Sudan and Ethiopia, because for countries like Uganda, they are the upstream, so I don't think they have much of an interest in that. Maybe they may run into water shortages because of the dam, because we'll put it, the water comes to them first before it gets to the dam, so they don't have anything to care about. But in the case of Egypt and Sudan, I think they have legitimate concerns in terms of some of their complaints, but in others, I think they are taking it too far. Just like Erisa mentioned earlier, if you look at the 1929, 1959 water treaties they were bringing on, those things don't stand a chance, because those were agreements that were made during colonial times to which Ethiopia wasn't a party. So he's not binded by them. And then I think that Ethiopia has shown a level of concern in the fact that in 2015 they signed the Declaration of Principles, in which they agree to share some data and other statistics regarding water movement, water supply, and other things. The main problem here is more about Egypt, because Egypt for Sudan has a case, because if you look at their own dam, which is just like 100 kilometers away from Ethiopia's dam, it means that if Ethiopia in dry years doesn't release water, their dam is obviously going to dry up. And then in terms of flood control, there are positives to them, and at the same time, there are downsides. If you look at it, it means that now they don't have to worry a lot about flooding, because most of the water will be absorbed by the dam. At the same time, if they don't coordinate well with Ethiopia, and sometimes the water is released or the dam is open, it's going to cause a lot of havoc. It's the same thing that is happening in Ghana. In Ghana, we have a dumping. There's a dump in Burkina Faso called the Bagri dump. And then the downstream communities in Ghana usually suffer the most when the dam is open. Usually, like it was open like was it a month last month? Yes, and whenever it's opened, it's going to wipe away thousands of hectares of crops. So I think the case Sudan is raising it. Sudan is saying that what they want is just an agreement on statistics, water levels, when you want to open it, when you want to close it. And I think those are legitimate from what I've seen in the case of Ghana. But they are also happy on one end because they don't have to care about flooding anymore. So it's all important. Egypt also, the lake Natha, most of the water comes from the Nile. So now if um Ethiopia is holding close to how many billion, is it 7 billion cubic meter of water every year? It's a real concern to them. And I think that um Ethiopia, in Ethiopia's demand, they says that is a non-consumptive because the water they are not consuming it, it's just flowing through the dam. So it's a very complicated issue, and I think that the AU will show leadership in this one and not let us not send it to outside world to come settle it in their interest and not our interest. I think the AU has taken charge in some of the negotiations, and I hope that it will do so in subsequent ones. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Abdul Bari. And I'm going to turn to you, Arisa. I have two questions. One is, as Abdul Bari earlier mentioned, it's quite refreshing to see that the $5 billion dam was financed locally without no external loans or concessional financing from the IMF or the World Bank. Does this indicate that Africans can build their own mega projects with little to no external funding by mobilizing domestic revenue? That's my first question. And second question focuses more on the geopolitical aspect of it, which Abdul Bari just touched upon. Do you see the US, or more recently, as we have seen in the news, the UN Security Council coming in and taking over the negotiations or getting a binding agreement?
Yeah, thank you, bro, for those two big questions. But I don't know if I will be able to answer them because they are all very big questions, and very interesting. But try to remind me if I don't answer one. But let me just answer quickly. First of all, in the first question, like if I see more African countries trying to, if there is a possibility of, locally and domestically financing such a project, I think in an optimistic manner, I would say it is possible, but it requires a lot of, sacrifice, especially from our governments and determination to break away from this traditional where we are used to receive development aid from developed countries. So that's what it will take, and it will also take a very well disciplined. It will need a very disciplined government with strong institutions which are ready to break that chain. I'll call it a chain because we are kind of trapped in a chain of depending on foreign aid and external industry development. It's like we don't believe in our own institutions and governments to take on such a big project. So of course with our local investors. So that's why it will need a lot of things to be in place from our own point of view. So that's why I'm talking about a very disciplined government which can try to monitor the situation and ensure that it is locally raised investments can be directed in such a project without any big scandals, for instance corruption and stuff like that. And if we are to raise local resources to invest in such a project, that's why I'm saying that it will need sacrifice because these are very big projects which are requiring billions of money. So if you are to raise the money locally without depending to any external donations or external governments which already have their own resources, it will mean that you will have to make a bit of sacrifice. But I believe that it is possible with the right people and right institutions in place. It is very possible. So this is a very great example that we can have. So if you want to say you want to break away from those colonial ties and the way how things are operating, apparently in most of African countries where projects are entirely funded by those international financial institutions and big monies from the IMF, ending up throwing the entire country in a debt trap. So I believe it is possible, but it will call for sacrifice, it will call for determination and rethinking of the way how we perceive development. Because I think we are more, tuned to the Western models other than rethinking our own community. We can do these things, but without all of those things that I have talked about, maybe that's why our governments decide to go the quick way by opening up our countries to foreign investments without thinking about the consequences of this. But the fact that we have projects like this, which are praised for having entirely depended on local investments and domestic resources, it means that it is possible. We can do it. Going to the second question, about the geopolitics of the project. That one I'll be also quick to answer by saying that, of course, we know what US does. Where there are resources, it is like I don't want to give this scenario, but I'll give it. It's like a butterfly. Wherever there is that bad audio or there is something that is really smelling, the butterfly to just fly and go there. So where there is money, where there are resources, where there is an opportunity for gaining in terms of resources, or even for even control, I mean, because we have seen US intervening in the conflicts in the Congo, Rwanda and the DRC, coming in as leading the negotiation. So for them, they want credit, and above credit, they want to show to the rest of the world that they are like the big cock in the house, and they are like the fathers, they are the household heads. So I mean, if anything requires negotiation, we won't be surprised to see them coming in to provide that platform. For that, surely they will. But again, as we have already said, that the project is really surrounded with those conflicts. I wanted also to weigh in what you were asking, Abdul, because I mean, when we look at this, the river Nile water, it flows through almost 11 countries. I think all countries in the East African region, almost in so one way or the other, they share in the waters of the Nile. So it is not an issue of one country. And unfortunately, if there is no an agreement between these countries, we are going to see these conflicts, and that's where we shall have in this external actor coming in, trying to harmonize the situation. And I mean, if it has happened already in Congo, where we have seen US going there to block the peace, if it has happened in Sudan, I mean, yeah, we are seeing even Qatar is now playing a very big role there in the conflict. So for them, they will always be there. I think it is built on a stereotype, or I don't know which inaccurate ideology that is there, that Africans, we can't sit down and settle our own issues without having this external influence. But I mean, so it will really need cooperation from all of these countries which are along the Nile. We shall need to cooperate. We shall need to build trust within each other, and we shall need to go back on the drawing table. Yeah, this one brings me back to the agreements which Egypt, from since then until today, they are still stuck on those colonial treaties. Imagine treaties which were signed in 1929, as we have been mentioning, 1959. How many years have passed? So we claim to have got our independences. Most of these countries, they got independence around 1950s, 1960s. So I mean, these are treaties, or these are agreements that need to be revised, and that's why I go back to the points I have mentioned. So we need to see these countries: Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, and all of these other countries that are sharing on the water, on the Nile waters. They need to go back on the drawing table, I think, to rethink these treaties, to ensure that they harmonize the situation and maybe come up with more recent agreements between themselves that can ensure that they utilize this water equitably and without, giving maybe one country an upper hand over the other. That's when, but again, we have to ask ourselves: are we capable of that? If we have failed to solve little conflicts within ourselves, I mean, currently there is conflicts in Sudan, there are conflicts in Southeast Sudan, and whenever there is kind of negotiations going to happen, we see what happens. They are sending these leaders in either Qatar, others are flying to USA. You see, so I mean, it now goes back to this project, and left the question unanswered. Are we going to see these countries coming on the round table, sit down, agreeing on what to do with the Nile? Are we going to see proper utilization of this water without causing conflict? But I mean, I believe as a Pan-Africanist, I believe that it is possible if at all we have leaders who are willing to, come together and sit and discuss and say we need to do this as a block. But without that, we shall see all of this influx from outside actors coming in. So I'll leave it there. Maybe Abdul wants to weigh in. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, just something small. I see that we like US or any other Western country coming to weigh in on any emerging negotiations. We don't like it. But it's also the fact that before you can be someone who broker deals or peace between countries, you need to have relevance because you stand as a guarantor to whatever agreement the people entered into, such that if one violates it, you'll be able to enforce it. Here's the case: if African Union goes into is a guarantor of this agreement, how sure is one country that if the other violates this, African Union will be able to enforce it? So I think in all this, it boils down to making the African Union relevant. If it's relevant and has the economic power, then we'll be able to broker deals among ourselves. We'll be able to, African Union will be able to guarantee this kind of agreements between countries such that we don't need to go outside the continent and search for countries to come and do those things who will come and put their interests before the general interest of Africa. If we know if any other country comes into as a guarantor for this, it's going to look at, okay, which one is going to be geopolitically relevant to my goals in the continent, which one is not, and then it's going to position itself and then make a deal that benefit the other one other than the other. So it's just complicated. So the bottom line is let's make up AU relevant, and in some of these cases we don't need to go outside in search for somebody to come and be the guarantor. Yeah, and Brooke, I want you to give us more insight on this about the dam. Is this we want to you are from Ethiopia, and you've lived pre and post the dam. So I just want to see what significant changes have you seen or are you anticipating as a local Ethiopian?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share the Ethiopian angle. And I think in terms of its significance, I think it has a national sovereignty aspect to it, because historically Ethiopia has been excluded from any type of agreement. If you look at the 1929 and the 1959 Nile treaties, it was only between Egypt and Sudan. And even now, Egypt and Sudan are only trying to have negotiations with Ethiopia. They're not looking to have a conversation with Tanzania, with South Sudan, and not with Uganda. But all of those countries contribute to the Nile. And interestingly enough, the White Nile, it starts from Lake Victoria, but the Blue Nile, as we know it, which contributes a significant portion of the water, about 85% of the Nile waters, it starts from Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is a starting point for the Blue Nile portion of the Nile. So as I mentioned earlier, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, is a symbol of national sovereignty, and since it's financed largely without foreign aid, and it has a very unique symbolism, because especially around 2019, when President Donald Trump invited the Ethiopian and Egyptian foreign ministers to broker a deal, he even at some point insisted that he was going to bomb the dam, and those kind of things. So it's really a point of celebration for the Ethiopians, the fact that we've seen it being completed, and now after completion, it's expected to generate about $1 billion per year in revenues. So it's a big thing in terms of foreign currency income, just from exports to neighboring countries, including Tanzania, Kenya, South Sudan. But also, as Abdul Bari has also mentioned earlier, it's energy is an important ingredient for industrial growth, and it has a potential to boost manufacturing, exports, and regional integration. But power distribution lines remain a bottleneck in terms of getting the power to productive industries. But there is no doubt about it that there is a huge opportunity for regional cooperation, and I think countries like Kenya are going to seize this opportunity to get cheap power and use it to their industries. As you know, power in Ethiopia is between 3 to 4 cents per kilowatt per hour. When you compare it to Europe, it's 5 times cheaper. Because here in Europe, although it varies from country to country, it's around 18 cents per kilowatt per hour. So you can understand the advantage it gives buyers of Ethiopian power in terms of getting power at a lower cost and helping them save their manufacturing costs. So I think it's going to be really big in terms of industrial growth. So that's my take.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe, Erisa, can you give us your opinion on how you see this situation being resolved between the countries? Do you see the countries allotting each of themselves a portion of the water? How do you see the conflict resolution and unraveling? Do you see countries like, we have seen President Ruto, who was present in the inauguration of the dam, offering his good office and goodwill to resolve the matter? Or do you see President Museveni stepping in as broker to this geopolitical tension? How do you see the situation being resolved?
Yeah, so I mean, it was as I said, I don't know. There is no straight way that we see that this situation will be resolved in, because I mean, this is a situation that has been with us since, I'm very sure, even long before the colonialist. Just that we haven't studied our pre-colonial history, but even before, the great kingdoms that existed within these areas, they had one way or the other on how they dealt with the issue. Because I was just checking the statistics, there are almost 11 countries which are in one way or the other sharing within these waters, from Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, South Sudan, Ethiopia, even DRC, Kenya and Tanzania. So even Eritrea. I mean, these are all countries. So if you look at all of these players, and again, you go back into the local institutions that we are having within the region. So no doubt that we shall have to see whether the East African community will have something to say, or even IGAD, the intergovernmental organization on development, something like that. I mean, these regional blocks. So as I was saying, I think we really need to think about a win-win situation, or we need to think about a win-win solution within this situation. So, and for me, I think that it is possible, but it will need to have a lot of coordination, as you were mentioning, Brooke. we need to have a lot of coordination from all of these different actors, not only the big men that we know within the region, but of course every country and every nation acts with their own interests. So when Ruto from Kenya comes in, you ask yourself how Kenya is going to benefit. We are talking about maybe having access to very cheap electricity. Maybe he will come in because of that. And Museveni from Uganda, he will come in, I don't know because of what, but I mean, we can have a win-win situation, especially if there is an agreement, which in my own perspective has to be an agreement that he's revising. And I don't know how Egypt will be accepting this, because for them they are too strong with the other previous two treaties that we are talking about, because those treaties, I think they gave Egypt a lot of huge control and powers over the Nile. So rethinking them, for them, they also see it in one way or the other as something that is trying to undermine their traditional position. But if they are in this situation, if Ethiopia is willing to make some sacrifices, for instance, say to export some of the surplus electricity to these other countries, especially Egypt and Sudan, which are the immediate neighbors to Ethiopia and, from the upper side. So for me, I would think that this is something that could maybe act as an incentive for them not to shout a lot and make even a possibility of having a harmonized treaty between all of these countries impossible. So if we have such incentives, maybe you say we are going to export electricity to your country on a reduced cost, as you were mentioning for Kenya. So if we have those things in place, then we can probably see a new treaty that comes in place, and this treaty maybe could be trying to throw a balance for all of these countries that are sharing on the Nile. But of course, without also forgetting the fact that we have these other external bodies. Maybe in this situation, how will the African Union as well come in to maybe facilitate the negotiation even before we think about the US? But again, also someone will be asking how effective is the African Union, because it has failed us on a lot of occasions. So, I mean, I believe that it is possible to cooperate and coordinate and see harmonization within these countries, but it will need to have a strong willingness from all of these leaders within the region, from the big guys, as you have been mentioning them, but also from the other humble neighbors who are in one way or the other contributing to this Nile waters. So that's my perspective, and I would say maybe in a more broader one, before I give it out, in a more broader one, in the as a Pan-Africanist, I would say that we need to have more of inclusive decision making, not just having a few guys, as you were mentioning, maybe Ruto, Museveni, because I think nowadays there is also a growing argument about how are these leaders taking others within the region, because if they are the guys to come on the table whenever there is something, there is a kind of overshadowing other leaders within these other sovereign countries, and at the end of the day, that is a very important point for these countries. So we need each other, we need everyone on the table, and we need to listen to each other. So, but without forgetting that this is a natural resource that beyond these political and economic benefits, we have to think about the environment, as Abdul was saying from the start. What are the impacts on the environment, and in terms of the human rights, are there any abuses associated with the project? So I mean, these are all developmental things that we need to consider on this project, but it is a promising one. We just have to pray that our leaders act accordingly to ensure that there is no any conflict that is going to result, so they can coordinate, cooperate, trust each other, and maybe have a new agreement that in one way or the other try to balances the control and the power surrounding the Nile, because it goes back to the Nile. It is something that goes beyond the dam, but the dam is okay, it's developmental, but the Nile, as we see different seasons, as we are talking about water controls, filling and refilling, all of those aspects have to be considered and harmonized. If our leaders are keen on those points and they agree on them, then we shall have a very smooth situation and the dam will serve a lot of benefits to the community and to the countries, not only Ethiopia, but all of the countries within the East African region.
That's very reassuring to hear. And Abdul Bari, do you have anything to add on the power alignments and realignments and how the situation can be resolved?
Yeah,
Because I think
I've already weighed on this previously, but I think within African geopolitics, I have little to talk about. I always prefer the other way around, but within Africa is quite complicated. But I just hope that my hope is that we get the best solution as a continent, something that will benefit all of us, because we hate to see ourselves hitting each other on something that could be beneficial to all of us. So on this is more of a prayer and a concern that we come into consensus and agree on how to operate the dam and avoid these alignments, realignments of countries over other countries and whatsoever. We are one, and we must understand that the enemy is not among us. The enemy is whoever is preventing us from getting to where we want to be. So if we are fighting among ourselves, then obviously we are digging our own graves. So this is a test of our unity, and we must pass it so that we can achieve the AU Agenda 60. I always say that we have to, if we want to have a vision, we should look at that document and then don't just let it be a document of words. We should put it into practice. It should be taught in schools so that we have aspirations. I most of the time think that we don't know where most people, especially school going kids and people in high school and most of the times university students, don't even know as a continent where we want to be. And so they don't have any kind of personal connection to where they are from. But I think that if we start by showing our people this is where we want to be, this is the African, we'll get more connected to it, and then we as people can progress as one. I think I'm even recently you can see the rise in far right parties in Europe, and you know that if we as a country don't grow, we're in deep shit. Sorry for my words. We're in big problem. So I don't want this is not the time for it. I think we should have another day to discuss that one. I'm planning on writing an article on that, the rise of far right in the West and what it means for us as Africans. If you listen to their views and what these people want, you will open your mouth in awe, because it's just bizarre. But the only solution to their concerns or their hatred is just for us to also build a continent that we can live in without wanting to move to their land. It's as simple as that. So that is my concern, is that, the bottom line of my concern is that unity over division. This is a project that is going to benefit not only Ethiopia, but the surrounding countries. And it's not as risky as people are trying to put it to Egypt. So I think there should be a middle ground for both countries, and it shouldn't trigger a geopolitical divide within the continent, which is already fragile. So that would be my submission on that.
do you have anything to add, Arisa?
No, maybe just closing up the
Yeah.
topic. I think, yeah. So in my own perspective, I absolutely agree with what Abdul has said. This is something that it is not just a mere hydroelectric dam in Ethiopia per se, but by the fact that, as we started saying, that it has been locally financed, it has involved a lot of investments which are domestically raised. So it is a symbol of African urgency for me in my case, because now we see what we have been yearning for, taking the stage by our own resources, utilizing our resources by our own means, without having any foreign debt incurred without having any foreign investment that are going to bind us to other people's conditionalities. So in that aspect, I see it as something that is really signaling something that we need to move beyond that era of always being at the receiving end and depending on something that is not locally breeded or something that is external, which in the end is not sustainable. So we are seeing a lot of shifts, especially from the Western European countries, the way how the far right arguments are being forwarded, as Abdul was saying. So this is something that should signal something to Africa. It is high time to take things within our own hands, and rather than dividing ourselves along the lines of this Nile water, I would really try to go back and call upon our leaders within all of these countries that are on the Nile basin, to come together and show that Pan-Africanist, spirit that we are calling upon every day. To instead of, going into quarrels and fights, to come together, to cooperate and ensure that they establish a very favorable environment for all the countries and utilize this resource for the benefit of the country, for the benefit of our people, rather than fighting. So I believe that it is possible to have a win-win solution for this situation. Egypt has been utilizing the waters just as other countries have been. So the fact that we have seen this development in Ethiopia, it shouldn't raise ego. It should just be something to celebrate for the continent. It should be something that all of the countries within the region should celebrate. But they should celebrate it by coming together, cooperating, ensuring that there is transparency, and also ensuring that the project is inclusive, since it has been led by our local investment. So I see it as a good thing that we can build on and try to display the Pan-Africanist principles and ideals that we believe in, that it is possible. So that is my take, and I thank you for listening. So I take it back to you, Brooke.
Yes, I think you've eloquently captured all the thoughts and ideas which I wanted to underscore. And yeah, I think we'll meet our audience next week on another interesting topic, and stay tuned.
Thank you.
That.